My years spent working as a house designer and builder taught me that the idea of home can have myriad meanings. Some people I worked for had an idea that was so precise it was almost impossible to figure out. It was defined by the shape of a roof or a really specific lifestyle or amenities in the building. What makes a house a home, I learned, is often really undefinable. It's a feeling known only to the owner. So I really considered myself a house builder, not a home builder. They had to make the home. In my years as a street minister, working primarily with people labeled homeless, taught me that, really taught me in my bones, that home isn't a place so much as it's a feeling. One couple taught me that as long as they slept together in the same spot every night, even though that spot was out in the open, they had a home. Home is a Germanic word dating back to the Middle Ages. And it means residence rather than shelter. It's a place to live one's life. So home is a state of being, which is different from house. And the funny thing is that Latin and Slavic languages have words for house, but they don't have words for home. And for most of us, home ideally conjures up a feeling of comfort, which is usually about safety and enjoyment. Comfort. The funny thing is that until very recently, homes weren't comfortable at all, not even for the rich. They weren't comfort in the way that we think of as comfort. But the word comfort comes from the Latin verb comfortare, to strengthen or console. So maybe in their way, homes as shelter have always been comfortable in that way. They've been places of strength and consolation. In his book Home, A Short Story of an Idea, professor of urbanism Witold Rybinski wrote that until fairly recently in human history, across the planet and across cultures, people didn't live in their homes so much as they camped in them. Dating back millennia, the rich needed mobility. They moved between various properties and estates, and they would literally roll up into their rugs and tapestries all of the things that they would need with them at the next location. And the servants would drag it all along. And the poorer classes, who were living in settled agrarian societies, needed flexibility. Their spaces were sparse and had very few things. And the things they had served multiple functions. According to Rybinski, in Europe of the Middle Ages, the bourgeois, which means silly city dwellers, began to emerge as a distinct class. They weren't exactly rich, but they had comforts, little luxuries that the poor didn't have, like space and light. The bourgeois mostly lived in densely packed row houses where they worked or sold their wares on the ground floor. They stored things in the basement and lived in one big room on top. Maybe it was two slightly smaller rooms, but the top floor, that one or two rooms, that was where everything happened. The cooking and eating and working and transacting business and entertaining, sleeping, bathing, even sexual intimacy. Every room had a big fireplace that produced a lot of smoke, but not a lot of heat. And lots of people lived in the homes of the bourgeoisie. They had extended family, friends coming and going, protégés, employees, apprentices, servants. Privacy was unknown, an unimaginable concept, as it still is in Japan. Actually, the Japanese have only in the last couple decades started to think about privacy in the way Westerners do. But they didn't have their own word for it. They say, puraibashi. Isn't that funny? Puraibashi. Sounds like privacy. Homes of the Middle Ages were like small communities by today's standards. And that hadn't changed since biblical times, the days when the prodigal son left his father's home. In biblical times, furniture was sparse, but Romans used chairs. You've probably seen those epic movies in which Romans are lying around in these really luxurious chairs that fit their bodies and the human form really well. Chairs that encouraged relaxation and lounging. And interestingly, those chairs disappeared from popular usage during the Dark Ages, then reappeared in Europe in the 15th century as something completely different. They were hard, they had flat seats and vertical backs. They were intentionally uncomfortable. Chairs were meant to convey the authority of the wealthy, not the abundance of the wealthy. And according to Rabinsky, monastic orders were the organizations that ordinary people built their lives around, and religious buildings influenced everything about everyday life. Did you know that the first drawers ever made were used for storing church records? Then, after centuries, literally centuries, people adapted drawers into their own homes. It took that long for ordinary people to feel like their personal effects were worthy of being stored in drawers. The first tables humans used were altars, and their lives revolved around those tables. And that was still going on in the 15th century. So everything in a home was imbued with meaning, serving ceremonial purposes, and everything was a ceremony. Every ordinary action was a ceremony. Washing your hands was an ablution. Breaking bread was a communion, and all of it was done without affectation or self-consciousness. Meanwhile, here on the land that would shortly be taken by Europeans and renamed, the northeastern United States, Quebec, and Ontario, the tribes of the Iroquois Nation lived in longhouses. Now, the Iroquois called itself the Haudenosaunee, or people of long houses. And generally, long houses were about 18 feet wide, 18 feet high, and 80 feet long. They could be bigger. They were constructed from fire-hardened poles that were driven into the ground and bent upward, then lashed together and covered with stripped branches and then grasses and barks that were layered and woven and sewn together, kind of like modern shingles. And in these longhouses, they built fires down the middle of the space with holes along the center to let smoke out. Longhouses could house up to 200 adults and children, a great extended matrilineal family. And these longhouses were surrounded by protective palisades. Imagine two massive stockade fences just a few feet apart, parallel to one another, wrapping the area. Like the homes of the European bourgeoisie, they were safe, functional, practical, and smoke-filled. They were the locus of joy and connection, ceremony and rituals that gave meaning and shape to their lives. And longhouses, like row houses, were not comfortable in the way we think of comfort. By our standards, they were simultaneously chaotic and minimal. They didn't have a lot of stuff, but somehow stuff was everywhere. Witold Rubinsky says that while there was no identifiable moment when homes began to be the way we moderns think of them, something began to change in Europe in the early 17th century. Because of its location, its small size, and limited natural resources, the brand new nation of the Netherlands became a financial center growing out of its shipbuilding industry. It was a Calvinist country where they prized hard work, modest living, and conservative values. And during this time, it experienced its golden age. It became home to thinkers and artists like Spinoza and Descartes, Rembrandt, and Vermeer. While cities like Paris, London, and Barcelona had exploded in population and suffered the consequences of poor sewage and water supplies, the Netherlands came to have dozens of small cities, basically almost like suburbs now, where residents could live sustainably in peace and health. In this low country, row houses were built along canals, so the fronts of them were far apart. And because these canals were so expensive to build, the houses were narrow. Originally, the houses were 1 room wide and 2 rooms deep. The front room was for work, and the rear room was for living, and that overlooked a private garden. The thing that set these houses apart from other European houses was that they were not crammed with people. They housed the unit that we now call the nuclear family, parents and their children. And because the nation and its people were doing so well, these families had the money to start doing something that humans had never really done before. They did what people always did. They would expand their modest houses little by little over time. But they started to incorporate a variety of little rooms so that each member of the family came to have his or her own room. Privacy. And each bedroom had its own little cabinet bed. They did something else that no humans had ever done. They decorated for pure enjoyment. They decorated the inside with curtains and tchotchkes and pieces of furniture that were pretty. They grew tulips in their gardens, and it was all for comfort, for beauty, for enjoyment. Within a little more than a century, the Netherlands came to be the standard by which the bourgeoisie developed across Europe and in the New World, and then across the rest of the world. Home became equated with comfort, autonomy, intimacy, stability, and family. Home became both a place and a feeling, an ideal. But like so many other things, the idea took on its own life, especially here in the United States. Homemaking became a vocation. Then home building, remodeling, and decorating became a complex, multifaceted, multimedia industry. Houses got bigger as families got smaller. Private spaces proliferated as neighborhoods became sparser and more decentralized. You know, the Connecticut town I grew up in is typical. Over the last 40 years, when I graduated from high school, it has 60% more houses, but 20% fewer residents. Isn't that amazing? And that's typical. 28% of Americans now live alone. We're more isolated than we've ever been, and record numbers of people say that they're lonely. So much so that psychiatrists talk about it as being another kind of pandemic. So home now is pretty luxurious, but it often doesn't feel very homey. So there's a new concept from the area just north of the Netherlands that has been gaining huge international attention over the last few years. Hygge. Hygge. The word hygge is both Danish and Norwegian, and it means something like coziness, a place to snuggle up with friends and family to enjoy one another's love and companionship, engaged in simple pleasures like games, crafts, and conversation. People often talk about hygge as being a style consisting of candles, quilts, and cookery, but it's not really about the things or the look. It's about the feeling those things make. Hominess. Hygge is about valuing experience over stuff, simple pleasure over wealth, intimacy over adventure. In her book, The Light We Carry, Michelle Obama talks about hygge without using the word when she tells the story of her mother, Marion Robinson, always saying, "You come home to be liked." For Michelle Obama, home was where you always found gladness. She writes, "I understand that I was lucky to know a good home early on. I got to bathe in gladness as a child. which gave me a distinct advantage as I grew and developed as a person. Knowing what gladness felt like, I was able to go out and look for more of it and to find and appreciate the light inside other people. Marian Robinson's definition of home has been the driving theme of her daughter's life, who acknowledges that for many folks, home can be a more complicated, less comfortable idea. It may represent a place or a set of people or type of emotional experience that you are rightfully trying to move past. There's power in knowing what that is and where you want to go. And then there's also power in discovering where you want to head next. I feel really fortunate. I love my old house and my little family that occupies it, ghosts and all. And I love my congregational home. Even though I don't sleep here, I engage in all of the things that give a home hygge. Good work, meaningful conversations, rituals that shape our lives, the safety to be vulnerable, the safety to be mutually supportive. And I know that many of you also think of this as a kind of home too. But you know, a lot of people don't know this kind of home. They don't know the kind of ideal hygge home. A lot of people don't know any kind of home, even if they live in some kind of shelter. In places like this, places that are near beaches and waterways where everyone seems to want to live, places that are getting increasingly more expensive, too many people with decent jobs have to make a choice between rent and food, or between utilities and healthcare. Despite having average incomes, many people live in substandard situations or have to constantly move in order to find affordable rent. They have no sense of home because even the most modest of accommodations are unattainable. Fortunately, there's a way that we can help. There's a way that we can live into the values of our faith in gladness and be a part of giving children and their families a chance to have the kind of upbringing that Michelle Obama and hopefully many of us had. Nancy Richmond is going to tell you a bit about it in a moment. But first, I'd like to invite you to rise as you're able to sing the first song in the gray hymnal, number 1.
The Social and Racial Justice Committee invites all of you, our UUCSC community, to build a home in South County with Habitat for Humanity. Habitat is a global nonprofit housing organization working in local communities across all 50 states in the US and approximately 70 countries around the world. The South County Habitat has been building homes since 1990. Right now, they're working on a 7-house neighborhood in Hope Valley, and in 2025, they plan to break ground on a 22-home project in Westerly. Habitat homes are net zero energy efficient homes. Habitat is a partnership, not a giveaway program. Habitat's homeowner families buy the houses that Habitat volunteers and crews build. Homeowners pay an affordable, low-interest mortgage and receive education on such topics as financial literacy and home maintenance in preparation for their home ownership. Homeowners also invest hundreds of hours of their own labor called sweat equity, working alongside volunteers. When a family helps build a place they can call home, not only are they building a better life for themselves, increased security, stability, safety, but they are building a better community overall. This past Wednesday, a group of us met with Kate Anderson, Director of Development, and Emily Passaroni, Volunteer Coordinator of Habitat for Humanity of South County. We learned more about building with Habitat. Here's how it works. I'm going to put the details in one of the e-newsletters in July, maybe August. We'll see. Between the UU calendar and the Habitat calendar, we decided to build on Saturday, September 28th from 8:30 to 12:30 p.m. Right, a.m. to p.m., right. in the morning. We'll work on whatever projects Habitat needs on that particular day. That could be painting, interior details, building a deck, putting on siding, landscaping, or whatever else might be needed. You do not have to know anything about building, have had any experience building, or any experience using any type of tool. Everything is trained. All tools are provided, including hard hats and gloves, hammers, nails, and so forth. And you will not have to do anything that you are not comfortable doing. For instance, I happen to like being on a roof or crawling on top of beams. Not required. Habitat crew leaders will be training and supervising every step of the way. We can bring people down to 16 years of age, but 16 and 17-year-olds must have an adult with them, a parent or guardian with them, and will need to sign a waiver. And we all will need to fill out certain forms. For those who want to participate but not build, there will likely be an opportunity to make and bring lunch to the work site to feed us and join in that way. People volunteering with Habitat build because they believe that everyone, everywhere, should have a healthy, affordable place to call home. Habitat is transforming lives in South County and around the world, and honestly, it's just a blast. I built with Habitat for years in Indiana, and it was such great fun. And to do it with your faith community is amazing. It's really terrific. So I guarantee you, you'll have a fantastic day building a home in our community with our community. So just to get an initial sense of interest, I put a sign-up sheet in the Oneida room on the little round table. This isn't a commitment, just an initial show of interest in building or cooking. There will be an official registration process we'll each need to do in early September. So I hope you'll join in. Please rise as you are able and remain standing through the end of the service.